Today, when people decry its failures over Gaza and Ukraine, I acknowledge again that the UN is not perfect, nor was it ever meant to be, and yet it remains indispensable. As someone who spent much of his adult life in its service, I remain convinced that the UN matters. It matters to the refugees seeking shelter, to the peacekeeper standing guard, to the diplomat negotiating a fragile truce. It matters to all of us who believe that cooperation is not weakness, that justice is not luxury. The United Nations remains an indispensable symbol, not of perfection, but of possibility. As Dag Hammarskjold so memorably said, it was meant not to take mankind to heaven, but to save humanity from hell. Even as we seek and find and express that love, we must acknowledge that to stand for peace in our time is to walk a tightrope across a landscape of contradictions. We live in a world where the language of human rights is often spoken most fluently by those who violate them, where the rhetoric of peace is deployed to justify war, where the enduring of one set of horrors is cited to justify the infliction of another set of horrors, where the victims of violence are judged by their geography, their religion, their color, their strategic value, and where geopolitical interests routinely distort justice and truth. Archbishop Tutu refused to play that game. He stood for peace not selectively, but consistently. He spoke out against racial discrimination in South Africa and against the occupation of large parts of Palestine. He condemned violence, whether it came from the state or from the street. He challenged injustice, whether it wore the mask of ideology or the robe of religion. He did not ask whether a cause was popular. He asked only whether it was just. This moral consistency is rare. It is difficult. It is uncomfortable. It is costly. But it is essential. Because peace cannot be built on double standards. It cannot be sustained by silence. It cannot be negotiated in rooms where the powerful speak and the powerless are merely spoken about. Where some are actors on the global stage, but the others are mere extras, shuffled about like pawns to do the other's bidding. To stand for peace today means asking the hard questions. Why do some lives seem to matter more than others? Why are some invasions condemned and others ignored? Why are the rights of the rich worth so much more than the dreams of the poor? Why are some refugees welcomed and others turned away? Why are some truths amplified and others buried? Oh, these are not, as some will allege, political questions. They are moral ones, and they demand a moral response. Tutu understood that neutrality in the face of injustice is not virtue, it is complicity. He reminded us that silence is not peace, it is the absence of accountability. That reconciliation without truth is not healing, it is erasure. In a world of shifting alliances and strategic interests, we must reclaim the language of peace from the calculus of power. We must insist that justice is not a bargaining chip, that human dignity is not negotiable, that truth is not relative to the interests of the strong. This requires courage. The courage to speak when it is inconvenient, to stand with the marginalized when it is unpopular, to challenge our own governments, our own institutions, our own communities, our own political parties, and sometimes even our own religious leaders, as Desmond Tutu did. But it also requires humility. The humility to listen to those whose pain we have ignored, to learn from those whose histories we have erased, to recognize that our moral vision is always partial, always in need of expansion. And it requires solidarity, not as a sentiment, let alone a slogan, but as a strategy, as a commitment to build alliances across borders, across faiths, across struggles, as a refusal to let the powerful define whose suffering counts. This is why we need to recommit ourselves to the United Nations. As someone who served the UN for nearly 3 decades, from 1978 to 2007, I witnessed firsthand its evolution from a Cold War battleground to a post-Cold War laboratory of global cooperation. I was part of its efforts to protect refugees and its struggles to build peace. I saw the UN falter in Rwanda and Srebrenica and rise to the occasion in Timor-Leste, East Timor, and Namibia. I saw it struggle with bureaucracy and politics, yet persist in its mission to feed the hungry, shelter the displaced, and give voice to the voiceless. Today, when people decry its failures over Gaza and Ukraine, I acknowledge again that the UN is not perfect, nor was it ever meant to be, and yet it remains indispensable. As someone who spent much of his adult life in its service, I remain convinced that the UN matters. It matters to the refugees seeking shelter, to the peacekeeper standing guard, to the diplomat negotiating a fragile truce. It matters to all of us who believe that cooperation is not weakness, that justice is not luxury. The United Nations remains an indispensable symbol, not of perfection, but of possibility. As Dag Hammarskjold so memorably said, it was meant not to take mankind to heaven, but to save humanity from hell. In the aftermath of its 80th anniversary last month, its challenge is to become more representative, more responsive, and resilient in a world that needs principled global cooperation more than ever. To abandon it would be to abandon the very idea of our common humanity. Our own survival, and that of the only universal world organization we have, the United Nations, depends not on nostalgia, but on renewal. And that renewal begins with the recognition that in an interconnected world, no nation is truly sovereign unless all are. It is time for that reimagination, that moral reimagination of the United Nations.